wind howled through the narrow streets of Wrangell, Alaska, in the spring of 1900, carrying the sharp bite of salt and pine. It was May, and the small town clung to the edge of the wilderness, a place where men dreamed of gold and whispered of things best left unspoken. For prospectors, Harry D., Colp, Charlie, John, and Fred shared a shack on the outskirts, their boots caked with mud, their hands calloused from years of chasing veins of quartz that gleamed with promise. The fire in their stove flickered low, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn walls. As they sat in silence, their funds dwindled to nothing, their hopes fraying like old rope. Charlie, lean and restless, stared into the embers. He was a man of few words, but his eyes burned with a hunger for the next strike. That evening, he returned from the docks, his breath quick, his coat dusted with frost. He spoke of an old Tlingit man he'd met by the water, a figure wrapped in a blanket, his face carved with lines of age and secrets. The elder had held a piece of quartz in his weathered hand, flecked with gold that caught the fading light. Charlie's voice, low and urgent, broke the shack's quiet as he recounted the man's words. "Go to Thomas Bay," the elder had said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Camp on the right side of the Patterson River. Travel upriver for 8 miles, then turn toward the high mountains. After 1.5 miles, you'll find a lake shaped like a half-moon. There you'll find gold." The other men leaned forward, the fire's glow reflecting in their eyes. Thomas Bay, 40 miles north of Wrangell, a remote inlet flanked by the bare glacier and jagged peaks, was a place whispered about in taverns, its name heavy with tales of loss. They called it the Bay of Death, Nana, in the Tlingit tongue, after a landslide in 1750 buried a village, claiming over 500 souls. Some said the land was cursed, that spirits lingered in the fog. But gold was a louder call than fear, and Charlie's hands trembled as he repeated the directions, tracing an invisible map in the air. John, broad-shouldered and skeptical, grunted. "Sounds like a fool's errand. That bay's nothing but granite and ghosts." Fred, younger, his fingers drumming on the table, said nothing, but his gaze flickered at Charlie, caught by the weight of the promise. Harry Colp, steady and thoughtful, watched them all. He'd seen men chase rumors before, seen them return broken or not at all. "You sure about this, Charlie?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with caution. Charlie's jaw tightened. "I'm going. Tomorrow." The next morning, as dawn bled gray across the sky, Charlie loaded his canoe. A rifle, a pack of supplies, a coil of rope, simple tools for a man bound for the unknown. The others stood on the shore, their breath clouding in the chill, watching as he pushed off into the current. The Stikine River delta stretched before him, its waters steel cold, flanked by the horn cliffs that loomed like silent sentinels. He paddled north, the shoreline fading into mist, until Wrangell was gone and he was alone with the wilderness. Days passed in the shack, each one heavier than the last. John took to pacing, his boots scuffing the floor. Fred whittled a stick into nothing, his knife flashing in the dim light. Harry kept his thoughts to himself, but the quiet gnawed at him, a sense that something was wrong, though he couldn't name it. The wind outside seemed to carry voices, faint and fleeting, or perhaps it was just the creak of the trees. On a damp morning in June, nearly a month after he'd left, Charlie returned. The men were outside, splitting wood, when they heard the scrape of a canoe on the gravel shore. They turned, And there he was, Charlie, but not the Charlie they knew. His coat was gone, his hat missing, his face gaunt and pale as bone. His canoe held nothing but a single chunk of quartz, its surface glinting with specks of gold. He stumbled toward them, his eyes wild, his breath ragged, as if he'd outrun something that still chased him. "Charlie?" Harry stepped forward, his voice steady, though his heart quickened. "What happened?" Charlie didn't answer. He pushed past him into the shack, collapsing onto a chair. His hands shook as he clutched the quartz, his knuckles white. The others followed, crowding the doorway, their shadows pooling on the floor. The air felt thick, charged with something unspoken. Charlie stared at the ground, his lips moving silently, as if wrestling with words he couldn't yet speak. John broke the silence, his voice sharp. "Where's your gear?" "You find that lake." Charlie's head snapped up, his eyes darting each of them, then away. "I ain't staying," he said, his voice hoarse. "There's a ship leaving for Seattle tomorrow. I need money for a ticket. I need to get out of Alaska. I never want to hear the words Thomas Bay again." Fred frowned, glancing at the quartz. "That's gold, ain't it? You struck it." Charlie laughed, a short, bitter sound that cut the air like a blade. "Gold don't matter. Not there." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You want to know what happened? Get me that ticket and I'll tell you. But I'm warning you, don't go to Thomas Bay. It'll bring you nothing but pain, mental and physical. I'm begging you, don't go." The men exchanged glances. Harry felt a chill settle in his bones, not from the cold, but from the weight of Charlie's words, the way they seemed to cling to the air. They scraped together what little money they had, a few coins, a crumpled bill, and pressed it into Charlie's hand. He nodded, his face grim, and began to speak. "I followed the old man's directions," he said, his voice low, each word deliberate, as if it cost him to say it. "Paddled up the delta, past the cliffs into Thomas Bay, camped the first night at Ideal Bay, the second at Ruth Island. Nothing strange, just quiet. Too quiet, maybe. The water was still. The trees didn't move, like the whole place was holding its breath. On the third day, I reached the Patterson River, set up camp on the right side, like he said. I followed the river 8 miles, counting every step, then turned toward the mountains. Climbed 1.5 miles, looking for that half-moon lake." He paused, his fingers tightening on the quartz, his eyes distant. The shack was silent, save for the faint crackle of the fire. Outside, the wind moaned, a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo Charlie's voice. "I didn't find no half-moon lake," he continued. "Found a lake, though, shaped like an Ess Lake, they call it. I set up there, started prospecting. The place was beautiful, Harry, but wrong. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I'd hear things at night, rustles, snaps, but nothing there when I looked. Kept at it for days, digging, panning, finding bits of quartz with gold, like this one." He tapped the rock, his hand unsteady. "But it wasn't right. I felt watched, always, like something was out there just beyond the trees, waiting." Harry leaned closer, his pulse quickening. John stood rigid, his arms crossed, but his eyes were fixed on Charlie. Fred's knife lay forgotten on the table, his hand still. "Then it happened," Charlie said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was up on a ridge near the lake when I saw them, swarming up from the water, coming straight for me. Creatures, dozens of them. I can't call them men, can't call them monkeys, but they look like both. Their bodies were covered in coarse hair, long and matted, but where the hair was gone, there were scabs, sores, oozing and raw. They moved fast, scrambling over the rocks, their eyes locked on me. Sexless, every one of them, like nothing I'd ever seen. The air was full of their cries, shrill, awful, tearing at my head. And the smell, God, the smell, rot and decay, so thick it made me gag, made me dizzy. He stopped, his chest heaving, sweat beading on his brow despite the cold. The fire had burned low, and the shack felt darker, the corners deeper. Harry wanted to speak, to break the spell, but his throat was dry. Charlie's words hung in the air, sharp and heavy, like the edge of a blade. I ran, Charlie said, his voice cracking. Dropped everything, pack, tools, all of it, and ran. They were behind me, their screams echoing, their stench following. I stumbled down the ridge, through the trees, back to the river, got to my canoe, pushed off, rowed like my life depended on it, because it did. But they didn't stop. One was on the bow of my canoe, Harry, sitting there, staring at me, cursing me every time I slowed down. I rowed for hours, days maybe, I don't know. When I looked back, it was gone, but I felt it still, watching me all the way to Wrangell. He fell silent, his head bowed. The quartz clutched to his chest. The shack was a void of sound. The wind outside stilled, as if the world itself had paused to listen. John shifted, his boots scuffing the floor, but he said nothing. Fred's face was pale, his eyes wide. Harry felt his own heartbeat, loud in his ears, and the weight of Charlie's story press against him, real and suffocating. The next morning, Charlie was gone before dawn. He'd taken the money, left the quartz, and boarded the steamship to Seattle, vowing never to return. The others stood by the shore, watching the ship fade into the mist, its whistle of faint cries swallowed by the sea. The quartz lay on the table in the shack, untouched, its gold flecks catching the light, but none of them reached for it. It felt tainted, a relic of something they couldn't name. Days turned to weeks, and the story gnawed at them. John took to drinking, his laughter forced, his eyes darting to the shadows. Fred spoke less, his hands always busy, as if stillness might let the fear catch up. Harry tried to keep them steady, but he couldn't shake the image of Charlie's face, the terror etched there, the way his voice had trembled. Thomas Bay loomed in their minds, a dark shape on the edge of every thought, its silence louder than any promise of gold. In early September, Harry and John decided to go back, not for the gold, but for the gear Charlie had left behind, tools, supplies, things they couldn't afford to lose. Fred refused to join them, his face tight, his voice sharp. "You're fools," he said, and turned away. Harry didn't argue. He felt the pull of the bay, not for wealth but for answers, though he dreaded what they might find. They set out at dawn, the sea calm, the sky a flat gray that pressed against the water. Thomas Bay opened before them, its shores lined with dense forest, its mountains sharp against the clouds. The bare glacier gleamed in the distance, cold and ancient, its cracks whispering of time older than men. They landed at the Patterson River, the gravel crunching under their boots, and began the trek inland. The forest was still, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, set Harry's nerves alight, though he kept his face calm. John walked beside him, his rifle gripped tight, his eyes scanning the trees. They followed Charlie's path, 8 miles up the river, then toward the mountains, the ground rising under their feet. The silence grew heavier, broken only by their breaths, their steps, the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. When they reached Ess Lake, Harry stopped. The water was clear, reflecting the peaks above, but it felt wrong, just as Charlie had said. Beautiful, yes, but eerie, as if the world had turned its back on this place. "This is it," Harry said, his voice low, "where he saw them." John nodded, his jaw tight. "Let's find the gear and get out." They searched the ridge, the trees thinning as they climbed. The wind picked up, carrying a faint smell, rot, decay, so subtle Harry thought he'd imagined it. His heart thudded, his hands cold despite the work. They found Charlie's camp, or what was left of it. Scattered tools, a torn pack, a pan half buried in the dirt. No tracks, no signs of struggle, just abandonment, as if the place itself had rejected them. Harry knelt by the pack, his fingers brushing the canvas. When he felt it, a prickle on his neck, the sense of eyes watching from the trees. He stood slowly, his breath shallow, and scanned the ridge. Nothing moved, but the air was heavy, charged like the moment before a storm. John was a few yards away, his back to him, staring at the lake. "John," Harry called, his voice steady, though his pulse raced. "We got what we came for. Let's go." John turned, his face pale, his eyes wide. He nodded, saying nothing, and they moved quickly, retracing their steps, the gear slung over their shoulders. The forest seemed to close in, the shadows deeper, the silence louder. Harry's mind replayed Charlie's words, the creatures, the cries, the stench, and he fought to keep his steps even, his fear locked tight. They reached the canoe as dusk fell, the sky bruising purple, the bay still as glass. They paddled hard, the shore receding, the mountains fading into the gloom. Neither spoke, but Harry felt it still, that weight, that watchfulness, as if Thomas Bay hadn't let them go. When they reached Wrangell, they unloaded the gear in silence, their hands shaking, their eyes avoiding the quartz still on the table. Harry never spoke of it, not then. John left for the south soon after, his laughter gone. Fred stayed, but he was different, quieter, his eyes always on the horizon. Harry kept the story close, writing it down years later, his pen steady but his heart heavy. He called it the strangest story ever told. And when he died in 1950, his daughter Virginia found the manuscript, its pages worn, its words alive with the terror of that spring in 1900. Thomas Bay remained 40 miles north, its waters calm, its forests silent, waiting.